All right, I'm happy to call this joint meeting of the Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee, the Sustainability Advisory Committee, and the Plan Commission together. And rather than conduct a formal roll call, what we'll do is start at the left, and everybody introduce yourself and say what board you're affiliated with, or commission you're affiliated with.
I'm Carrie Andella. I'm Planning Secretary.
I'm Carrie Brown-Tess, and I'm BPAC.
Adria Shi, BPAC.
Craig Schunkweiler, BPAC.
Brandon Bowersox-Johnson from BPAC.
Mario Ryan, Sustainability Advisory Commission.
Lou Hopkins, Planning Commission.
Tyler Fitch, Plan Commission.
I'm Steve Wald with the Sustainability Advisory Commission.
I'm Cynthia Hoyle with BPAC.
Bart Bartle, Sustainability Advisory Commission.
And Andrew Stumpf with the Sustainability Advisory Commission.
That's great, thank you. All right, well, we have called to order. We've introduced ourselves. Are there any communications? Anybody? I don't think we have any that I know of. So we'll jump right into this study session. A presentation by Champaign County Regional Planning Commission staff on the draft 2040 Long-Range Transportation Plan. So who's going to kick it off? If you could please introduce yourselves.
It's working, right? Yeah. I'm Rita Black. I'm the Transportation Planning Manager for the Champaign-Urbana Urbanized Area Transportation Study. That's the Metropolitan Planning Organization for the Champaign-Urbana area. We are here today just to present the draft or what we have done so far on the development of the long-range transportation plan for the Champaign-Urbana area. The plan is for 2040. This plan is a federal requirement. It's a plan that we need to update every 5 years. The previous plan, the LRTP plan 2035, was approved by all the entities back in December of 2009. Then we need to get this plan approved in December of 2014. We are still working on the plan. At this time, we are working on the future projects and estimating the cost of the future projects. Then today we'll be presenting the work that have been done so far, but probably we'll be coming back to you around September, October with the final draft of the plan for comments and then the final approval. I'll leave you with Ashley, who will be doing the presentation.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. We appreciate you scheduling this special meeting just for us. Like Rita said, this is just a draft plan, so this is not a final document. We're not obviously looking for approval on anything. I'm just going to give you an overview of what we've done so far and an overview of the contents of the plan in general.
Excuse me, I caught Ashley, but I didn't.
Oh, sorry, Ashley McLaughlin.
Thank
I'm a
you.
planner with CUATS. This is not moving. Maybe I'll use this. I just did this before you guys came, so I know it does work. So just give me a second here. Okay. And just a disclaimer, I'm a little extra nervous because my former professor, Dr. Hopkins, is in the audience. I'm afraid I'm going to stumble a few extra times.
You'll be all right.
Okay. So, like we already said, we're part of CUATS, which is an entity of the Regional Planning Commission. A big part of the long-range plan is an existing conditions report. So to start, just a description of our metropolitan area. The region and transportation system are expanding outward and the population is growing. The black dotted line is the perimeter of our metropolitan planning area. The blue municipalities are the urbanized area defined by the census. Tolono was added in 2010, and we also added Mahomet, which is not technically part of our urbanized area. But we added that to our metropolitan planning area in 2010 as well. The transportation system is expanding outward. The roads in red are from 1914, and then as you can see, we've just grown outward from there. And this is a graph of population growth since 1970. So as you will notice, there is a significant jump from 2000 to 2010. Our projections are the red dots there on the right, and we are projecting about 40,000 additional residents by 2040. That's slightly more modest growth than has been happening since 1990. And to get a little more in depth, we actually have two different projections for our long-range plan. One is based on current trends, and one is based on our LRTP 2040 vision, which includes installation of high-speed rail infrastructure from 2030 to 2040. So the projections based on current trends are the population projections are on top in red, and the employment projections are on the bottom in blue. And so then our slightly higher projections with the higher growth scenario are in orange for population and green for employment. So based on current trends, we're projecting about 40,000 extra residents, a little bit more than that. With the slightly higher growth, about 5,000 more residents on top of that. But then for employment, there's significant growth in the high growth scenario, up to 162,000, as opposed to 148,000 in the current trend scenario. So just to give you a little bit of context, our unemployment rate right now is particularly high. So even at our highest growth here, even if we went up to 162,000, that's basically an unemployment rate of about 5% with that population. So it's still a reasonable population employment ratio. So to give you a spatial idea of the difference between the current trends projections and the LRTP 2040 projections, you'll notice here in our 2040 vision, there's not as much growth kind of in the exterior areas. Most of our growth is projected for the downtowns, University Corridor, and some established growth, pre-established growth areas. For instance, the I-57 interchange over here at Curtis Road, where there's already existing plans and planned infrastructure in place to handle that type of growth. And then in terms of employment, it's pretty much the same thing. We've projected for our vision a lot more employment in the downtown areas, in the University Corridor, University Research Park, for instance, the Clearview development. Whereas over here, there's not nearly as much employment projected, and a lot of it is on the periphery.
There's going to be employment and growth in population, but not at the level that it is in the downtown areas, basically.
Right. So back to our existing conditions. In terms of demographics, the region is urbanizing, population is diversifying, and the way people travel is changing. Between 2000 and 2010, there's been an increase in the Asian population of 5.4%, African American population 3.6%, Hispanic population 2.5%, and a slight decrease in the overall makeup, or the overall, proportion of the Caucasian population, down 5.7%. In addition, there is a pretty consistent rural to urban population shift. Now, we're talking at the county level here, and so about every 10 years, about 2.5% of the rural population shifts into the urbanized area. And so we project that, or we anticipate that being consistent into the future, and that's accounted for in our population projections. In terms of commuting for workers, as recorded by the census, this is actually just a snapshot of 2010 data. It doesn't give you change per se. The only thing I'll point out here is that driving is lower in Champaign and Urbana than it is in Savoy, Tolono, Bonneville. We obviously have better infrastructure for public transportation, walking and biking, and so those numbers are significantly higher, particularly with walking in the Champaign and Urbana area. And just to give you an idea of change over time, since 2000, driving alone and carpooling combined has gone down about 5% in the urbanized area overall. Biking has gone up about 1%. Public transit has gone up almost 2%. And working at home has also gone up 1.5%. In terms of land use, we're seeing increased population density, and agriculture remains the largest land use in the metropolitan planning area. I won't go into this land use map here. I'll just point out that agriculture is the light green that makes up the biggest part of our land use. In terms of the environment, air quality is showing a declining trend. Water quality is mixed with a lot of room for improvement. So for air quality, we track air quality with these two basic statistics from the Illinois EPA, 8-hour ozone readings and 1-hour ozone readings. The 8-hour ozone readings is the graph on top, and you can see we're hovering right around this acceptable threshold line, and we've surpassed it in 2011 and 12. For the 1-hour readings, we're still pretty well below the threshold. And in terms of water quality, we measured 10 different segments. Well, not we personally. This is also from the EPA. We measure 10 different segments in terms of supporting their designated uses in the area. In 2008, 6 of those 10 segments were not supporting their designated uses, and that's up to 7 segments are now not supporting their designated uses. So there's a lot of room for improvement and something to be very conscious of as we move forward with new development and expanding the transportation infrastructure. So something new for this plan is that we're measuring quality of life in a couple different ways. So a very brief summary of this analysis is that obesity has been identified as one of the most urgent health priorities in the community by us as well as the local health entities. And areas in the core generally meet more livable criteria than areas on the fringe, which is perhaps not surprising. Just some general statistics. This is just a very general graph that shows the dramatic increase in obesity in the U.S. since 1994. And as you can see, Illinois is right in there, increasing with the rest of the country. And obesity is related to a lot of different diseases, which is why it's one of the biggest priorities. It's related to diabetes, as shown below, also high blood pressure, hypertension. So as transportation planners, we're concerned about this because active transportation can greatly increase people's daily activity levels. So this is just a graph that shows globally kind of the correlation between active transportation and rates of obesity. So as you can see, the U.S. is at the end here, way at the end, with the highest rates of obesity and the lowest rates of walking, biking, and transit use. And whereas, obviously, these countries have much lower rates of obesity, higher rates of active transportation. So some of the ways that we're measuring this, these are several variables here on the left. Access to parks, transit connectivity, access to service areas such as grocery stores, employment centers. Basically what we're doing with all of these variables is that we're mapping them at the TAZ level, which is the traffic analysis zone level, which is all these different little squares here. And so we're trying to identify gaps in the system where maybe there are a lot of sidewalk gaps, for instance, and a high rate of obesity, places that we can target for infrastructure improvements where it might have a big impact on public health or quality of life. So looking at the distribution of grocery stores, people's access to park, crime reports. We actually got a massive collection of illness data from one of the health facilities in the community that has allowed us to geocode illnesses in relation to our transportation network and all of these other variables to have a better idea of how those things relate. So in the final plan, we don't have this analysis ready tonight. In the final plan, we're hoping to be able to include then a neighborhood level assessment for all of the neighborhoods in the metropolitan planning area, identifying which ones have the highest quality of life via all of these variables here. So what we've done is basically indexed all of these variables, given them a number score so that there's a rating for each neighborhood. I'm probably not explaining that very well, but you are welcome to ask me questions later. So in terms of the transportation system specifically, one of our major outreach methods in terms of getting existing conditions feedback on the transportation system was our community conversations bus. Hopefully some of you have been to the bus and know what I'm talking about. Last summer we went to 16 different events and got over 950 public comments. That says 910, but I did not update that. These are just a couple pictures of the events. And what we did in this first round of public input was to ask people 2 basic questions: how they generally get around the community in a week to get an idea of what modes of transportation people are using, and also asked them to identify strengths and weaknesses in the transportation system by mode. So we were able to geocode all of their responses as well as their residential locations. And so we were able to see where all we were gathering input from and target our outreach to areas that were underrepresented. and also make sure we have a good coverage of the entire transportation network with input and the communities. Another thing we did for public outreach were 4 visioning meetings, one with the public, one with business developers, one with youth, one with social service employees, where we asked people, where do you think we'll be in 2040 if we do nothing different? And also, where would you like to be in 2040 if we, well, basically just where would you like to be, and how might that be different than where you think we'll be if we do nothing different? So we talked about that discrepancy and how we can address that gap if there was, in fact, a gap. Oh, sorry, and I didn't explain this poster. We hired a graphic facilitator who was drawing the conversation live. So this allowed people to kind of see what people were talking about and respond to different pictures throughout the conversation. It also allows us to post it online and get additional feedback, and for people to add to their previous comments or understand how their comments were translated and know that they were heard and documented. So out of our public input and our existing conditions evaluation, we came up with these 6 themes that summarized the public input in the visioning meetings and our own research on the existing transportation system and previous plans. And these are the 6 themes that are guiding our LRTP vision and goals and objectives for the LRTP through 2040. Safety and security, balanced development, multimodal connectivity, accessibility and affordability, healthy neighborhoods, and resilient economy. These are just briefly described here. They all are very broad descriptions. We do have a chapter in the LRTP that describes them more in depth and kind of distinguishes one from another, though there is a lot of overlap, of course. So in terms of the specific modes, I'm just going to give you a brief summary of what each mode kind of entails right now in terms of existing conditions, and the comments in yellow are directly from the public input. On the right, you'll see a summary of just a couple of the goals and objectives that relate to that particular mode, but not the strategies that are related to that. So these are just the vague goals and objectives. And I don't know if all of you have the goals and objectives, but I know some of you have that full draft chapter that includes the goals, objectives, performance measures, strategies, data sources for tracking, etc. So that's in our draft plan, but it is not finalized yet. So in terms of pedestrians, few workers currently walk to work. Safety is a big issue. Obviously, pedestrians are the most vulnerable users of the transportation network. And overwhelmingly, respondents to the survey said that we need better sidewalk access and connectivity. So some of the goals related to that are reducing the total number of crashes involving pedestrians, and also expanding the sidewalk network by a to-be-determined percentage with ADA-compliant facilities, bridging pedestrian gaps along public right-of-ways by 2020. And I will just mention that we are currently undertaking a massive sidewalk assessment where we have interns going out and documenting 900-plus miles of sidewalk in the metropolitan planning area so that we can have a better inventory of the existing conditions and be able to target future upgrades and improvements. In terms of the bike network, few workers bike to work currently. People overwhelmingly said that bicycle infrastructure access needs to be improved as well as connectivity. People complained a lot about bike paths being very limited and not connecting to the destinations that they wanted to get to. They also expressed a need for ongoing safety education and enforcement for drivers and bicyclists both. In terms of goals and objectives, we would like to reduce crashes, of course, involving bicyclists by 2020. And we would also like to complete all short-term bicycle infrastructure recommendations proposed in the Urbana Bicycle Master Plan and the Champaign County Greenways and Trails Plan by 2020. So a lot of our goals and objectives do reference existing plans. Obviously, there's been a lot of work already done by the local municipalities on these different issues, and so we refer to those methods and strategies included in those plans that have been already proven. For the transit system, transit ridership is way up in the region. The transit service area does not currently match the urbanized area, so that leaves some gap in the urbanized area for people that aren't serviced by MTD. And respondents to our survey said that they wanted more direct routes, more weekend service, and safer bus stops. I will mention that we got most of our comments were about the bus system. And the bus system also received more positive comments than any other mode of transportation. So it's a very popular service in our community. In terms of goals and objectives, one of the goals is to expand the service area to be coterminous with the urbanized area boundary by 2030. And in terms of accessibility and affordability, a lot of people talked about snow removal. Obviously, we have a lot of months of the year where sidewalks and bike paths and bus stops are made unusable by the snow. And so creating some sort of consistent system to allow people to be active and use those facilities throughout the year would be fantastic. In addition, we would like to provide transit routes to at least 3 new areas in the community by 2020. Oh, yes, and that's just a short graph right there of ridership from 2007 to 2012, up to 11.4 million users in 2012. In terms of cars, we have a lot of research done on complete streets and policies in place for complete streets, access management, and installing roundabouts. The current crashes per 100 million vehicle miles traveled are currently below state targets, which is great. And people on the survey in reference to the automobile network overwhelmingly talked about North Prospect. So there's not a lot of congestion in our network, but if there is, North Prospect seems to be the place that everyone thinks of when they think of congestion. So that was the biggest complaint. In terms of safety and security, we would like to reduce the number of fatalities and severe injuries by 2020. We would also like to create a freight plan that identifies proposed freight routes by 2020. There is currently no system in place that distinguishes where freight vehicles should be as opposed to regular vehicles or pedestrians and bikes. In terms of accessibility and affordability, adhering to the CUAT's access management guidelines for new development and roadway construction. Okay. In terms of trains, rail use is growing. Again, a freight plan is necessary to identify rail and truck needs. And in terms of public input, many people said that they wanted to see high-speed rail, which is a very popular project. So our main goal in reference to the rail network is to begin construction of a high-speed rail system, at least to Chicago by 2030. There have been studies done on this, so we're basically referring to the studies and routes that have already been talked about and documented. In terms of accessibility and affordability, we would like to increase Amtrak ridership from Illinois Terminal by at least 5% by 2020. That graph there on the bottom right is Amtrak ridership that has increased. That chart goes from 2000 to 2012. And increasing ridership could mean increasing frequency and or number of routes. In terms of air travel, as I'm sure you all know, air travel at Willard has decreased since 2006. The percent of delayed flights is down 50% since 2003. And people want more flights to bigger hubs. They miss having options to get out of town and get to other regional centers. So our main goal related to this is to increase enplanements at Willard by 10% by 2020. The graph on the bottom shows enplanements for regional airports. Willard is the one in the dotted blue line at the bottom. And there is a study group currently in place to study kind of the future of Willard Airport, so we're hoping they come up with some good recommendations. So out of all of the existing conditions and public input, like I said, we developed goals, objectives, and performance measures to track all of these goals into the future. We also produce an annual report card that tracks all of these goals and objectives so that we know what progress we're making, if we need to change any of the goals or objectives. And to give you an idea of some of the ways that we measure these future potential developments and goals and objectives into the future, we have a suite of statistical models at CUATS that measure a variety of different things, some of which we've already touched on. We already talked about population and employment projections, land use change and impact. Those were actually the population and employment maps I showed you at the beginning. We have a travel demand model that allows us to see where congestion will happen based on different development scenarios. A MOVES model, which shows us how motor vehicle emissions will change into the future if the mode mix changes in terms of more or less public transportation, more bicycle use, et cetera. Social cost of land development, that gives us an idea. That's actually the charts on the right, gives us an idea of how Costs of utilities and development costs will change pending different development scenarios in different areas of the metropolitan area. And then the last two are the quality of life. Basically, will make up the quality of life assessment that we'll be including in the plan. They measure local affordability and livability, as well as our health impact assessment, which looks specifically at the illness data related to our transportation network. So in summary, these are like the main projected growth areas for our 2040 vision. Like I said, it's mostly in the downtowns as well as established corridors, the University Avenue corridor, predetermined development locations such as the University Research Park, which already has a plan in place, as does the interchange over here. And then there's also the Clearview development and Olympian Drive. We're projecting slightly increased industrial development. So currently we are in our second round of public outreach with our Community Conversations bus. We're going to 10 additional events this month. And the picture on the top is just a shot inside the bus. We have information boards about the plan, and we have maps of projected proposed projects for the community that we gathered from the municipalities. So what we're asking respondents this time around is what 3 projects they think are most important in each of the different time periods that we've mapped. And we'll have these projects detailed more specifically in our subsequent presentations. This voting board at the bottom is optional for people who visit the bus. It just allows people to see what other people are thinking of in terms of which projects they think are most important. Some of the favorites are consistently high-speed rail, which is this blue one here at the bottom. The Kickapoo Trail is also very popular among visitors to the bus. And our next steps for the plan, basically our last major project for the LRTP that we haven't begun yet, are the project funding projections. So as soon as we are able to analyze our public input about funding or about project priorities and revisit the projects with the municipalities and our steering committee, we'll be able to start project funding projections into the future to include in the plan. And that is all I have. Did you want to add anything? Okay. Okay, so yeah, if you have any questions, please.
Thank you very
Now's your
much.
time.
Thank you for the work you've done so far. Throw it open for anybody have any questions or commentary you'd like to add at this time? You wowed us. That's the test right there. Mr. Hopkins.
So do we get to see the tentative project list?
Not this time.
But you
You have to
indi-
visit the bus.
That's why we intentionally didn't put them there, because we want you to go to the bus and public citizen.
So who else? I guess the project list is what matters in the end.
Sure.
So how is the project list being worked on?
Okay, what we have done is we have looked at projects that were proposed in the past, in the previous plans, and we are doing an evaluation of which project have been completed, which project haven't been completed yet. We also communicate with all the agencies who are members of QATS. Those are the City of Urbana, the City of Champaign, the Village of Savoy, IDOT, the University of Illinois, the Village of Mahomet, and the Village of Tolono. The last two are no member of QATS, but are part of the planning area. And we ask them which are the projects that you want or you are planning to have in the future, included in your capital improvement plans. They send the whole list to us, and we compile the most important ones. And then what we did is, with those projects, we prepared the tables that you saw on the bus, and we are asking people about their priorities. Now, the staff, what we are going to do is, with that list and also the ideas that we got from the public from the first round, we are going to compile all that information and set up priorities for the projects and work that out with the different agencies. But we are also looking at how those projects address the goals and objectives of the long-range transportation plan. And we also model all that into the suite of models that we have to see what kind of projects provide better results in terms of the goals and objectives that we have in place.
So having inferred from the map, which had the projects on it, but went by so fast it's hard to see them, there is at least one proposal on North Prospect, appears to be south of Anthony Drive. It's potentially an example of how we could think about the complexity of the goals in relation to projects. An implied goal, I can't remember whether it's in there, is congestion reduction. Okay? In order to achieve many of the other goals, one could argue that the most appropriate strategy is to leave or even allow an increase in congestion on North Prospect so that the advantages of walking, using public transit, downtown intensity of development, many of the other things you're talking about, actually gain in comparative advantage. And I guess the way this is framed, I'm a bit concerned that the ability to have that kind of discussion may be difficult. I'm not sure where it can come in.
Ma'am, we'll have public input as soon as we get done with the presentation portion. Thank you.
I can tell you that we don't have any goal for reduction in congestion.
Okay,
one
well,
thing
that's good.
That is different. We don't have that goal at
Okay.
all.
Even though your input suggests that congestion is one of the largest concerns.
Only on North Prospect.
I understand, but I'm talking about North Prospect. That's the point.
We think that we can reduce congestion in North Prospect, changing the way that North Prospect operate in terms of using other modes of transportation. And we have been talking to MTD about the possibility in the future to have a hub for a transit center on North Prospect, that people can access better transit there. And also we are, as Ashley mentioned, we are doing the inventory of the sidewalks, and we know that North Prospect doesn't have sidewalks. Then that's an area that will approach the city of Champaign and say, hey, you can improve the area. But
I
we don't
understand,
have a
but
goal of reduction in
What
congestion.
I'm trying to suggest is that there's a different way to think about it, which is instead of making it easier for people to go to North Prospect, make it harder.
We agree with you on that.
But then what you're describing doesn't sort of do
No,
that.
because what we are saying is we can improve what is going on in North Prospect, providing more sidewalk, providing bike facilities, providing transit, but not making it easier for the auto traffic at all. We are not proposing anything in that regard at this time.
Are you suggesting decreasing all traffic in North Prospect? Is that what you're saying? So to
What
refocus on the
yes,
downtown?
but my point is not just auto traffic, which is
Sure.
the congestion concern, but if you want development in downtown Urbana and downtown Champaign
Right.
and University, and you want vehicle miles traveled to decrease, or even transit vehicle miles traveled to decrease, which is not the way we usually think about it,
Sure.
then having realignments of land use is one way to do that, rather than enabling perhaps less desirable land use patterns by correcting the transportation patterns.
Sure.
I'm just saying that's
Yeah.
another way to think about it.
Yeah.
That alludes to a question that I had that you all can perhaps answer, because people put a lot of emphasis on being able to walk and bike. And in terms of planned projects in the community and resource allocation, that has not been a major focus. So how did you balance that? Because I know, for example, one of the things we most often hear from people is they want better street lighting, and yet neither city requires street lighting to be installed as part of new residential developments. So how did you all reconcile that public request with current sort of spending priorities?
Well, that's something that we have to negotiate with the cities, but that's why we are now using more information that we have to develop the kind of models that we have, like the local affordability and livability index, and also the health impact assessment model, because both models consider safety as one of the factors. And talking to people, we know that safety is related to presence or absence of street lights. Then now with those values, with those models and the results that those models provide, we can talk to the cities with numbers on our hands and telling them, this is a better way of using the funding to make people walk or bike in the community.
Follow-up question on that. So, for example, when a new facility or development is proposed, however, if the city doesn't ask you to run that analysis for it, then how will we get that information?
Well, we cannot solve all the problems of the city.
Well, see, my concern is that when something is proposed, the public really wants the information that the model would provide, but somebody has to pay to run the model. And so we have a little bit of a disconnect in terms of public desire and funding for doing some of the work.
No, I understand that. And that's why for this particular plan, we are doing something different that is not required by federal law. And our intention is to do an analysis of each neighborhood based on the input that we receive from the public and use the two models that we have at the neighborhood level to give that information to the cities. The same way that we did it when we got the first round of public input. We collected the information and divided the information by municipal boundaries, and we gave all the input to the city of Champaign, for example, by mode of transportation regarding comments received, positive or negative, from the community, with the intention that they can look at that and see what the community wants. Then that's what we are going to do at the neighborhood level now, that we can have a better sense of what the community wants and what we want to do with that.
Anything? Brent?
Yeah, you had another one of the models was, I think, called the social cost of land development. And I wondered if you could just describe a little bit more about that model and about how in the plan you could give us some sort of map or some sort of indication so that, in the future when someone says, oh, well, let's put an X out here on the fringe, we could somehow go back to a color-coded picture or something about your social cost of land development model and say, oh, well, looking at this picture, that wouldn't work. It would be really expensive because of sewers and transit and, and all the other social costs.
We have been doing some testing of the model, and those are the results that we have there based on what is being proposed so far, but not with all the projects that will be including, just an idea. The model basically takes into consideration the population and employment projections and the costs associated to development of land regarding water, sewer, green areas, roadways, lights, everything. Based on that, then we get what is the impact of developing one way or the other. One of the limitations of these models, and that's why we classify them at the county level area and then at the neighborhood area, is that the greenhouse gas emissions model, the land use model, the travel demand model, and the social cost model are models that are really difficult to use at the level that we will want to use them in terms of a single project, how that single project will impact, because those models were basically created for big metropolitan areas, and we just did some changes to them to reflect the community. Then give us an idea of what are the impacts, but that's why now on this round we are moving away a little bit from those models. We are using the results, but we are moving away a little bit from those and going into the neighborhoods and doing analysis of quality of life, because we have a lot of data that we can use for that. And we develop the models of quality of life in the office, in the QAT room with our resources, and we know what we are doing there.
Did we have another question over here?
Yes, it was pretty much answered. I was curious
Okay.
about I wanted to see the model list and how they're all, separate silos. And how do you optimize all the models at once for a proposed development?
The top four models, the population and employment projections, LIM, the TDM, MOVE, and SCOUTS, all 5 are interconnected. The output of one model is the input into the other model. Those 5 are interconnected. The area that they cover, we started at the county level, and then from there we go to the urbanized area level. But beyond that, the model is not; those models are not able to predict in detail at the small scale what is the impact. Give us a general number. The two models at the bottom, LALI, which is Local Affordability and Livability Index, and the Health Impact Assessment, those 2 are at the neighborhood level. Then those are the ones that now we are using to take neighborhood by neighborhood and analyze them, and then with the data that we have collected from the public input to see what we can do and give that information to the cities. It's not a requirement of the plan, it's something that we are doing because based on all the input that we have received, we feel like we are obligated to respond to the people in some way, and this is the way that we are responding.
Anything further? Thank you very much. We do have at least one member of the public wanted to ask us a question. Did you get your question answered? You can approach us if you wish. Okay. Thank you. Anybody else in the audience care to ask a question or comment? Mr. Hopkins?
I'm curious, you're now including Mahomet and Tolono in the planning area. They are not members of CUATS. And I'm curious how that's going to work and how that's, and also sort of why St. Joseph is not if Mahomet is.
Well, the urbanized area is defined by the U.S. Census Bureau. We are not the ones defining that. And the urbanized area is defined, last time in 2010 was defined to include Tolono. Then it's Champaign-Urbana, Savoy, Bonneville, and Tolono.
But not Mahomet.
But not Mahomet. When we had our first committee group to discuss the long-range transportation plan, the first task to the group was to define the expected growth of the community of this area and the impact of that area. And then the group decided that we should include Mahomet because it's the closest community to Champaign-Urbana, and they think that will be joined together to Champaign in the next 20 years. And that's why we included that area.
But you can't allow them to join CUATS because the MPO is defined by the census definition of urbanized area?
Yeah, the census, when they define the urbanized area, the entities who are members of the MPO are the ones that are within the urbanized area. And they pay part of the local match.
You can't change that.
I can't change that, but let me tell you, regarding Tolono, we have approached Tolono and Bonneville several times to come to the table, and they haven't done it.
But you can't invite Mahomet because the census didn't define them as part of the urbanized area?
Mahomet is not a formal member of CUATS, but they are invited to participate in CUATS. They can come. What they don't is regarding the federal allocation of funding. Right. The funding is only for the communities that are part of the urbanized area.
Okay,
but
that's what I was trying to figure out.
But Mahomet come to the table. They sit, they provide reports, they are part of all the meetings and all that.
Yeah, okay.
There is a hand in the audience.
Yeah, did you want to come? There is not a time limit for them to be speaking, ma'am. They're giving us a formal. No, there's no time limit. Yeah. I invited you to come up, ma'am. You could come up right now and talk to us. Okay. That's not the way this process works, ma'am. I'm sorry. Thank you.
Oh, I disagree with you, sir.
Thank you, ma'am.
All right. You don't have to thank me, but I
Okay.
Everybody has a people amount of coming to school. And that is how the process works.
You have something further?
Yes, I had a question how the goals were set, what kind of input went into deciding what the various goals are, which, are 15% or 20%?
For many of the goals, we took the goals from the previous long-range transportation plan and expand upon the comments that we received from the public based on the pillars that Ashley mentioned it. And we look at the data. That's why we produce a report card every year. And then we look at the data and see how the trends are. And based on that, we set the percentage of increase or decrease of each of the objectives that we set in the LRTP. For example, regarding crashes, we see the trends in the last 5 years. And then based on that, we set the goal for the future. And we discussed those specific numbers, targets, with the members of the steering committee that include people beyond QS. Then that's the way that we set up the goals and objective and performance measures for each of the elements that are in there.
Mr. Shankwan.
How long has KUOS been doing these plans? How far back?
1964, we
Okay.
celebrated 50 years.
Right. So
yesterday.
every 5 years for pretty much?
From 1964 to probably 1984, there were only 3 plans. But
Okay.
since 1994, have been regularly after every 5 years.
Okay. And then when you complete a plan, say, do you ever go back and look and reevaluate that plan maybe for, I'm talking 10 years ago and saying, or maybe even 15 years ago, when it was maybe more, we were looking at the periphery growing out, and then now we're looking more at infill. But then that should have an impact then on how you're reassessing things now. Do you do that?
That's what we do as part of the existing conditions. We look at the trends in the past many years and see, okay, this is what is going on in the community. We
Mhm.
look at the projects that have been completed. We look at why they have been completed. And there are some projects that haven't been completed, and then we dismiss those because we are looking in a different direction now. Then that's the way that we evaluate the previous plan. We always connect to the previous plan.
So there is some self-evaluation, I guess.
Yes, and every year, as I said, we produce this report card that look into what have been done and how well we are doing, and if we want to change direction and change the targets that we set for each of the goals and objectives.
Okay.
Yeah, I had a question on the map of projects that had different development areas in parts of town. The one that jumped out at me as a critical one for Urbana that wasn't represented, at least not with sort of a pull-out box, was the High Cross Road corridor. As I think about the areas for, especially for auto-oriented commercial development, High Cross Road already has investments in road infrastructure and sewers and those sorts of things, and is one place I think that we'd rather target some of that growth rather than say, let's have people leapfrog and jump and go a few more miles east or a few more miles southeast of town. So I wondered if that was an area, one of the important development areas that was also part of the picture, even though it might not have a name on this and a box on the map.
Sure. We, after talking with Urbana about their future plans and projections, it's certainly included in the population and employment projections. It didn't make it onto that particular map. I mean, that is kind of a summary map, and we can do that if you feel like that's visually important for people to understand, because it's true, not a lot of people necessarily know about those plans. Yeah. It is included in the population and employment projections, like I said. It just didn't necessarily meet the kind of the number thresholds that made it onto the map. But yeah, those plans are included, definitely. And it is, you can actually, here in employment, you'll be able to see, oh, you know what, it looks like it's off the map.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
Right, it is right on the edge there, yeah.
But yeah, this area over here does get represented in the 2040 plan, whereas it doesn't over here in the current trends plan.
Okay.
Because we had to intentionally add that because it's existing plans, not necessarily a natural growth area.
There is growth and there is employment projected for that area, but not at the level of increase that we have for downtown. That's why it's not on the map.
Okay, that makes sense.
First of all, thanks very much for coming in tonight. I find this very informative and appreciate your efforts here. I just have a question. You mentioned the health assessing of neighborhoods, and I'm wondering if you might go into that just a little bit. I guess I'm just curious, thinking about my own neighborhood, of course. All right, what can I do to improve on that kind of it? What kind of criteria are you using on that?
I have the list. I didn't bring the document either. So what we started with, like I said, we got a massive data set of occurrences of obesity in the community. And so what we started with was that map, essentially, of that illness, and then attempted to control for different socioeconomic variables, and then included things like access to parks, which is basically a 7-minute walk from a residence, transit connectivity in the area. So this is all at the TAZ level. We have mapped where obesity is, and then also for that area, if they have, reasonable access to grocery stores, transit, what the residential mix is, how many vehicle miles are traveled on average in that community, what the sidewalk connectivity and bike routes look like. So there are a number of different variables that go into each of those assessments, and they're all weighted slightly differently based on the Poisson regression, I think, was used for that. I'm not the one that did it. The person that did it could tell you much better exactly how they went about it. And that report hopefully will be released publicly soon. It's actually still going through a number of different committees for review.
We just got the report and the model done probably 3 weeks ago. Then we are in the process of reviewing the document and editing the document, but my hope is that in 2 weeks it should be out, and I can send a copy to you.
Oh, great. Thanks.
I think we had some over here. Yeah.
I was kind of piggybacking off what you were saying and the quality of life. I was just curious, when we're surveying our citizens, are we making, or have we made attempts to make sure that we're getting information from like a percentage of what our population actually reflects and what our projections are looking like?
I don't have those in here. What I do know, sorry, I couldn't fit everything. So yeah, on our survey, we have voluntary information that people can add about age, gender, location, what else is there? Race, ethnicity. And so those 4 or 5 qualities there, we tracked against kind of the urbanized area levels. We had slight underrepresentation in college-stage students because they make up a massive proportion of our community, and slight underrepresentation in over 70. So we are tracking that, and then having that data. Again, it's voluntary data. We don't, require that people submit that when they're submitting their comments, but it does allow us to be able to then target places and populations that are underrepresented. So it is all comparable. It's not exact necessarily, but all of those statistics are comparable with the urbanized area averages.
And can I ask a follow-up?
One follow-up? Yeah, sure.
I saw in your picture you had some kids. Have you been targeting any kids in the process as well, getting their opinions?
I can talk about that a lot. We have a kids table, and it's a success. We have found out that having the kids are really attracted to the bus. And then we have a kids table where we have prepared kind of a safety document for the kids to color. Then we have markers, we have stamps, we have a lot of things in there for them. And then at the time that they are coloring, then we are talking to them about different things. And actually, yesterday we got a kid that was really interested in what we were doing, and he attended the first bus event last year, and he was at the event that we were yesterday, and he came to me because I'm always at the kids' table. He came to me and said, "Do you remember me from last year?" And I said, "Actually, yes, I remember you." And he said, "How do you remember me?" And I said, "Well, because you were the kid that came to the table and said, if you are talking about transportation, why don't you have a boat in your in your bus.
It's a good point.
I said, well, because we don't have, that's not a mode of transportation here, but I can take
Yeah.
your comment. That's what I told him last time. Then he told me yesterday, why if you collected my comments and you said that you were taking care of my comments, why you still don't have a boat in the bus?
Smart kid.
Yeah. Then but we track the kids, and we have they do drawings and all that, and we have the drawings posted inside the bus that they know that we are paying attention to what they say.
In other ways for tracking the kids' comments, we also have a wish tree, so they can write transportation wishes and put it on the tree. We also, some of the kids, it's really surprising, even the really young kids can totally take the survey and understand what they're looking at and find their neighborhood on the map. So it just depends on the child and the age and how much time they're willing to spend on the bus.
I think I have a couple of recommendations of kids who would
Yeah.
seriously love to be a part of it, who are
Oh, that's
avid
great.
bikers, who are
Nice.
who could give perspective from a child who bikes on their own
Sure.
without parents and their perspectives.
That's great.
If you're interested, I'd love to connect you.
That would be excellent.
We also, for the visioning meetings, we did one at the Champaign Public Library just for youth, middle school and high school kids. And so we got a lot of input related to transportation and also just related to general, like, behavior. Like, they don't have enough stuff to do and they can't get to the things that they want to do and their limited mobility and access. And so that was all stuff that we tracked as well.
We had- Yeah, she had.
I was going to follow up on the question about the health impact assessment and add that there is a health plan being done right now in the community for Champaign County. CU Public Health District is heading that up, but it is required now for them and for nonprofit health organizations. So Carl and Presence are involved. And that we have coordinated, and Rita and some of her staff have participated in developing the goals there, because a lot of the goals in the long-range transportation plan directly impact some of the health, because the obesity issue is high, and they didn't have any way of tracking how, vehicle miles traveled and all of that sort of stuff. So, and I think that now you are also able then to get some data from them, so that there's a reciprocal relationship going on that's providing us with a much clearer picture of health issues, and then having metrics for how we measure whether we're making progress or not.
Yeah, in terms of active transportation and also access to their resources and facilities.
At the same time, I want to point out that the travel demand model that we developed, initially we developed for automobile traffic, but about 2 or 3 years ago, we got funding from IDOT to improve our model, and now our model is able to predict bicycle trips, pedestrian trips, and transit trips, and as well as automobile trips. Then that's another way of us evaluating the projects that we are proposing.
I may have missed this. I saw one of the tables listing vehicle miles traveled by mode. But I wasn't able to pick apart how much of that was basically just driven by population growth. There was pretty substantial growth I saw in vehicle miles traveled. But what are you predicting for like VMT per capita? Because I know that is
I can send you an email.
it's just too complicated?
I have it here.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, so not a number, but I'm curious, because it's been recently, obviously, and it's going down, and I'm wondering if you are modeling that as a long-term trend that continues, or flat, or back up again?
Based on the result that I recall, I have seen is going steady now, and that's what we are predicting, that probably is going to be steady. I don't think that we predicted a decrease. It's more steady line.
Okay. Yeah, just to follow up briefly, I recently, I don't have any special expertise in this, but I did just hear lots of new and emerging sort of technology-enabled car sharing, in different, particularly urban areas. There's lots of new market niches opening up, assisted by mobile technology and computing, both for sharing private vehicles, taxi fleets, dispatching them, and even some emerging uses of transit that would be specialized and targeted to need. and public transit. I'm just curious if any of that, it's probably too new to try to build into a model.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I do have a question. You talked about coming back to each of the boards or each of the commissions, and that'll be great. Look forward to seeing the plan when it's finalized. Do either of you know, or do you know if we'll be asked to sort of accept the plan, or sometimes we have a chance to register an objection and pass that to the city council?
That's usually the case that we present to in the past was only the plan commission, now will be all
Probably
three.
all, yeah.
Yeah. And what we do is we present to the plan commission, you can provide comments, objections, whatever you feel is appropriate, and then you pass that to the city council, and then the city council goes through the process of approval. But we require approval of each of the agencies who are part of QATS for the long-range transportation plan.
I think I knew that. I just wanted to hear you say it. Thank you.
Yeah, one more question. I know the other key piece of this at the end really is the specific project list. Is that really focusing just on road building projects, pouring concrete, or is some of the implementation steps other policy things? One example I can think of could be recommendations to boost our car sharing Zipcar fleet, or to really work on getting bike sharing for the core of the community. Are those kind of recommendations in the scope of this project, or do we really just focus on
Those are
road?
already part of the objective that we have defined on the chapter for goals, objective. Those are strategies that we are recommending to put in place. And we have specific numbers assigned of what we want to do with that. But at the same time, probably we'll have a chapter with things that can be done in the future that is not just related to roadway projects. At the same time, on the plan, we usually have a map that shows the projects that have been completed when you compare with the previous plan, that people have an idea of that. Then we have, because federal law don't allow us to recommend projects if we don't have the funding for those projects, then we have visions. Then we'll have a bicycle vision, we'll have a automobile vision, we'll have a pedestrian vision, and that will show all the projects and all the things that we think should be put in place, but we don't have the funding in our hands to assure that those projects are going to be built. And then we'll have the traditional map that is required by law, showing just the federally funded projects that we have the funding for them.
Okay, that's great.
Thank you very much. Do we have anything further? Well, thank you for presenting tonight.
I just wanted to add one quick comment. As someone who does transportation work around the country, we have an extraordinarily sophisticated staff and process and modeling here. I don't think there's any place in the country of this size that has the modeling capability we do, and many larger places do not. So I think that's something people in the community would know if this isn't their field, because what we have here is pretty unique. And I'm very happy that we have it.
Yes, it's impressive. Thank you. All right. Well, thank you again. And if nobody has anything else, we don't have any other items on the agenda, so we are adjourned. Thanks for coming. I enjoyed it.
Thank you.